today we're joined by our Horizon colleague, Dr. Donaldo Canales, who serves as the lead methodology reviewer of all protocols submitted to Horizon's Human Research Protection Program, so HRPP. And in this role, he ensures that submitted research protocols are methodologically sound, scientifically valid, and feasible. And in addition to HRPP reviews, Dr. Canales provides methodological, statistical consultation to Horizon clinicians and researchers. His research background is in applied forensic psychology and he's conducted research related to offender recidivism prediction, mental health and personality and offending, and police psychology. Donaldo holds a BA with an honors in psychology from University of Saskatchewan and holds both an MA and PhD in experimental/applied psychology from UNB. The title of Dr. Canales' presentation today is Distorted Data: How Questionable Research Practices Impact Science. And he'll be speaking about questionable research practices, or QRPs, that can threaten the integrity and validity of scientific research. QRPs can result in misleading findings, wasted resources, and a diminished public trust in science, which we're seeing more and more today. And today, he'll be highlighting several types of QRPs, their consequences, and strategies to minimize their occurrence. So I pass the floor to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Wow, you really took me down memory lane with all the stuff I've done in the past there. So if you just bear with me, I will share my stuff here and get this presentation up and running. So thank you all for being here. And thank you for coming to this presentation today. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about and very interested in. And that is questionable research practices and their impact on science. And being involved in research for many years, I've seen a lot, I've heard a lot, and I've almost done some of these things. So I'm just letting you know that no one is immune, and very excited to share some information and some insights. Okay, so first we'll start talking about how I came across this topic in the first place. So there's this area of study referred to as meta research that I came across about 10 years ago. And meta research I particularly saw it within the context of psychology, but it applies broadly to the research literature. And it's the study of how research is done. So effectively, meta research is research about research. So people that are into this type of research, they are focused on analyzing the methods, the processes, the decision-making, and the practices that researchers use when conducting their research. And with the overall goal of improving the reliability and validity of scientific findings. And there was a lot of discussions at the time related to publication bias within this broader umbrella. And publication bias is the tendency for research that has positive or significant results to be more likely to be published rather than research with negative or null results. So in general, exciting or novel findings are more likely to be published because they are more attractive to journals, they're more attractive to researchers, and they're more interesting to the public. And over time, this has resulted in an overabundance of significant findings within the literature. In fact, some research has found that within the medical literature itself, 96% of findings are statistically significant. And when I saw this initially, I thought, like 96, that's almost 100%. That can't possibly be true. And because it would require almost all hypotheses to be true, which is not possible. And it would require almost all studies to have high statistical power. And based on other research, we know that about half of the published medical literature has less than 20% power. So I knew that there's something else going on. So that shifted my thinking towards the individual research level. And I wanted to understand what are some of the reasons at the individual investigator level that could be contributing to publication bias. And this led me to the topic of questionable research practices, also known as QRPs. Now, QRPs are research behaviors that mislead or distort the true findings of a study. Now, this could be intentional or unintentional actions on behalf of researchers that introduce biases into the reporting of results. Now, why does this happen? It can happen for a variety of different reasons, but most notably, there's intense pressures in some circles to publish positive results. So that is a major incentive or driving force behind publishing or engaging in questionable research practices. And also, a lot of researchers lack proper understanding of research methodology. So why do QRPs matter? Well, first of all, they undermine the integrity of scientific research because it can result in the publication of false or misleading findings. And it not only affects the scientific community, it can also inform and misinform policy making. And policies can be introduced that, with totally good intentions that can be based on faulty research, and it can harm public trust in research. And the validity and reliability of research is critical, especially in fields like medicine, because ultimately it can put patients at risk of harm. So what are some types of QRPs? These are the three main types that are primarily discussed in the literature. If you Google QRPs, these three will be the ones that show up the most often. And so we'll just talk about each one of them. The first one that we'll discuss is selective reporting. And this is when you only publish certain results that tend to be desirable. So this is when investigators are focused on publishing only positive or significant results. It's kind of like, has anybody ever told you, like, you're talking to somebody and they're telling you a story and they're only telling half the story? This is kind of the same thing. So it's when researchers choose to only report the results that support their hypotheses or their theory. So primarily desirable and positive results. On the other hand, they ignore or omit negative or null results. Additionally, another way of this can happen is they will leave out positive or statistically significant findings, but that tend to be undesirable for their theory or hypotheses, or those that tend to produce conflicting results. A consequence of this is that over time, this skews the overall body of evidence in a particular field, in a particular direction, or towards particular theories or conclusions. And it provides an incomplete picture of the evidence. And it's also important to note that unreported results can also include critical and important findings, but a lot of those just don't they don't see the light of day, and they end up in the file drawer, which is known as the file drawer problem. Selective reporting can also happen at different levels of research. So it can happen at a per study basis. So some research teams will do multiple studies, and let's say they do 3 studies, 2 of them don't work out, and they'll just publish the one that works. Or it can happen at a individual research question or hypothesis level. So you would only publish those research questions or those hypotheses that tend to be supported. Moving on to the next one, which is referred to as harking. And I always laugh when I hear this because it reminds me of the Christmas song. But harking is an acronym, and it stands for hypothesizing after the results are known. So this is the practice of changing hypotheses based on obtained results rather than on prior knowledge. It misrepresents the study as being hypothesis driven when in fact the study was actually exploratory. I mean, I don't know if I'd even call it exploratory, more like a fishing expedition. So I'll give you an example here, an example that I wrote down. So let's say you are doing a study and your hypothesis is that dietary changes have no effect on heart disease risk. So when a person changes their diet, it has no impact on heart disease risk. It doesn't increase it, it doesn't decrease it. It doesn't make it worse, doesn't make it better. And after you collect your data, you find an unexpected correlation. So now you revise your hypothesis to better align with those results. So now you'll say something like, oh, it's predicted that specific dietary changes can reduce heart disease risk. So you can see in this example, you've kind of started with the conclusion, and then you've gone backwards and you built a story or a fairy tale to support that conclusion. So it's completely backwards as to how science is supposed to be conducted, where you start from hypothesis, or you start with prior knowledge, which leads to a hypothesis, and then subsequently the results, as opposed to looking at the results and then modifying your hypothesis to fit it. So what are some problems with changing hypotheses to match data? First of all, it can make your study appear vastly more predictive than what it actually was. It gives the perception that the study was designed to test that hypothesis in the first place. And it also gives the impression that the hypothesis was correct all along. So it's a very common form of QRPs. It's probably one of the most common ones that is talked about in the literature. And the last one, which can be argued to be the most serious one, is known as p-hacking. This is when researchers actively manipulate their data or their methods or the statistical tests until they achieve a statistically significant result. One important distinction here, this is not the same as falsifying or fabricating data. You're not changing your data. You're not making up data. You are just softly massaging your data in such a way to achieve a desired p-value, even though the underlying data does not support that conclusion. Analysis based on papers that are known to p-hack has found that when data is p-hacked, it actually increases the occurrence of false positives. So any results from a study that's been p-hacked often have spurious results that likely cannot be replicated by other investigators. So I'll give you an example here to illustrate this. So let's say I have some control variables and an independent variable, and I'm looking to predict some outcome. So I have, in this example, 2 control variables plus my independent variable. I assume this is a hierarchical regression. So I enter these variables into the model, and my model is not significant, 0.085. So I'm sad. I go home and I cry all weekend long. However, I think to myself, well, do I really need one of those control variables? Was it really that necessary? How about I just exclude it? So now I have one control and one independent variable, and I run my analysis, and now I have a significant result, and I can do a happy dance. So this is basically a very simple example of how p-hacking can be done very, very easily, almost by anyone. To expand on p-hacking, I'll give you several more examples. So I refer to this as the p-hack starter pack. So I'm going to list 6 different types of p-hacking that I often see. And I think they are some of the most common ones talked about in the literature. And there are actually various types of p-hacking that I actually see quite often. Not just here. I've seen it in other places in the literature as well. So the first one is an extension of the example I just gave you, which I refer to as variable roulette. So what researchers will do is that they will just do different combinations of independent variables, dependent variables, control variables. They will try different combinations and permutations until they get the particular combination that gives them the desired results that they're looking for. Another example is referred to as optional stopping. This is when researchers continuously run their analysis repeatedly as data accumulates, and they stop as soon as a significant p-value is achieved. And what this does, the problem with this is that there's no guarantee that additional cases will continue to be significant. So you get non-significant results, you get some extra cases, you run your analysis, you get something significant, and then you stop. So what this does is it actively manipulates the data collection process. A third one is referred to as data trimming. So this is the selective inclusion and inclusion of data. So it can happen at the case level. So you can exclude and include cases. that may or may not result in your analysis being significant or not. Or another form of this is the exclusion and inclusion of outlier variables. We know that outliers can have a significant impact on analyses. It can usually they strengthen correlations. So sometimes people may start adopting, initially they may have a very restrictive outlier policy where they, after a certain point, all cases are considered outliers. And then some people may actually start relaxing those considerations and start including outliers in order to enhance their results. Scale redefinition. So this is what happens when this happens. Researchers will take different measures, different questionnaires, and start playing around with the scoring rules. So they'll usually most measures will have a very defined scoring rubric. And what some researchers will do, they'll start eliminating items or coming up with their own scoring rules in order to have results that are favorable to their hypotheses or theory. Another one that falls under this is composite scores. So a researcher may have one outcome non-significant, another outcome non-significant, another outcome non-significant, but when you combine the three outcomes, you get a significant result. So they'll start combining variables and start producing composite variables and in order to achieve significance. And the problem with this is that composite scores are usually very vague and very subjective. There's really no rhyme and reason. They're just throwing a bunch of variables and into the mix, into the pot to create one overall composite score and trying to predict that. The fifth one is a method called discretization. And what this is when you have variables that are naturally continuous and then they are categorized. So you have a variable like, let's say, age, for example, which is a naturally continuous variable, and then people start creating categories. And I know this is done a lot here. I've done it myself. There is nothing inherently wrong with doing this. The problem is when you start using it in order to p-hack your study in order to obtain significance. So there's many measures which are continuous, which tend to produce certain types of scales. You can take variables and dichotomize them. You can take variables and reduce them down to a yes or a no type variable, and that is a perfectly legitimate approach. But when you're doing it for the purposes of p-hacking your study, that's when it becomes a problem. And the last one, a favorite one of mine, is statistical shopping. That's when researchers will just jump around from one analysis to the next one until they get something that's statistically significant. Another version of this is when researchers start adjusting parameters within certain types of analyses in order to give them significant results. So, for example, methods such as regression or other more multivariate type of approaches, there's a lot of adjustments and settings and parameters that you can adjust to customize the analysis. And so some researchers will start playing around with all those different parameters in order to move that p-value under 0.05. So again, the main idea here is that data is being manipulated until a significant result is achieved. Most of you don't know this, but Smokey the Bear actually does moonlight as a research methodologist, and he wants to remind all of you that only you can prevent QRPs. So researchers can take several steps in order to prevent or minimize QRPs from affecting their work and ensuring the integrity of their work. So I have here on the screen 4 different types of approaches that you can take to try and minimize or prevent the occurrence of QRPs. The first one is to commit yourself to methodological rigor. Commit to having high standards, commit to doing high quality research, and commit to the study's methods and the hypothesis. So the closer that you adhere to a protocol that is developed in advance, that's been agreed upon by everybody, the harder it is to engage in QRPs. A second approach is transparency. This is being honest in your reporting. Be open about your methods, your analysis, your sample sizes, your limitations, even when the results are negative or inconclusive. What I tend to do when doing analysis is I will have a running sheet and I will document any major changes that I make. So if I were to, transform some data, in this document, I would indicate the date, what exactly that I did, to what variables, my reason for it, any supporting literature that may support my decisions, and I'll usually create a new copy of the file. So having a running document to track all the changes that you have made is important, because then you can go back and review the changes that you made in case any problems creep up. A third approach is training. So take as much training as you can. Just expand your horizon, your intellectual horizon, your research knowledge. Take courses or any workshops that you can on research ethics, data management, research methods, and statistics. And this is essential, I think, for new and also experienced researchers. I can tell you that most of the QRPs that I have seen come from experienced researchers. With people who are new to research, it can happen as well, simply because they don't know. But some people, they should know better. And lastly, consultation. So when you come across something that doesn't feel right, or you're making a change that you're not sure about, seek out consultation. Seek out review from somebody outside of your team who has really, no vested interest in your results, and get that third opinion that would be unbiased. And just a plug for research services here. Here at Research Services, we have several wonderful people on staff with expertise in both quantitative and qualitative methods. And we would be happy to talk to you anytime about any changes or any problems that you may come across with your research. That's all I have. Short and sweet. Hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.